I still don't know what I expected when I walked into Boothman's diner that morning. Maybe I thought she'd be sitting there, twirling a spoon in her coffee like she used to, pretending not to notice the lipstick mark she left on the rim. Maybe I hoped she'd smile, apologize, say she missed me. Maybe I just needed proof she existed, that I didn't imagine our entire relationship. But the booth was empty. Boothman's was our place. Not fancy, not even clean most days, but it had charm. It had that lopsided jukebox that always got stuck on Sinatra, and it had waffles that tasted like someone's grandmother still worked in the back. I proposed to her right there, in booth number 6, with a ring that shook in my fingers so badly I dropped it into her orange juice. Her name was Callie, short for Calindra. Her parents were into crystals and celestial names, but she hated all that. She told me once that if I ever called her Moonchild, she'd leave me for someone with a beard and a van. She laughed when she said it. I didn't know I should have taken her seriously. It's hard to explain what Callie was like. She wasn't loud, but when she was in the room, everyone leaned in. People remembered her. She had this way of wearing sweaters like armor and sarcasm like a perfume. I was the guy who held her bag while she tried on 10 pairs of boots and never bought any. I was also the guy who texted her twice if she didn't answer the first. I was annoying like that. I just cared too much, I guess. We were supposed to get married last month. The invitations were printed. The deposit on the venue was paid. My best man, Ira, kept practicing his speech in front of his guinea pig just to get the pacing right. Everything was lined up. Except Callie. She said she needed a creative reset. She told me she was going to Maine to reconnect with herself, rent a cottage, sketch, maybe write some poetry. I didn't question it. I even packed snacks for her trip. Organic fig bars. She always rolled her eyes at fig bars, but I like to think she secretly appreciated them. She left on a Thursday. The following Thursday came and went. Then another. Then one more. 3 weeks. No calls. No posts. Her location went dark. Her email auto-replied with some vague, out-of-service message that didn't sound like her. At night, I stared at the ceiling until it got light again. I didn't tell my friends how bad it was. I told them we were taking time apart to reflect. I told myself that, too. Over and over. The worst part? I kept checking her Spotify to see if she'd made any new playlists. That was our language, you know? When she was mad, she'd add angry indie rock. When she missed me, I'd get soft piano in my inbox. I waited. Nothing. Then, out of nowhere, she texted. No greeting. Just, I'm back. We need to talk. Boothman's at 9. I barely slept. I shaved twice, convinced I'd missed a spot. I wore the blue sweater she once said made me look like someone who knew what he was doing in life. I didn't, but I wore it anyway. And that's how I ended up staring at an empty booth on a rainy Tuesday morning, hands sweating into my coffee, watching the door for someone who used to be my person. When she finally walked in, 20 minutes late, drenched, eyeliner smudged, I stood up too fast and nearly knocked over my cup. She sat across from me, like we were strangers waiting for a rideshare. Then she said the thing that broke me in half. I wasn't in Maine. She looked me dead in the eyes and said she'd gone to Oregon. With someone she met online. Someone who understood her process. A musician. They'd lived together in a camper van for 2.5 weeks. She said they didn't even talk about me, like I'd been a blip. An old song on shuffle. She said she needed to feel something again. I think I nodded. Or maybe I blinked really hard. My tongue felt like it had turned into paper. I didn't ask for details. I didn't yell. I just asked for the check, paid both coffees, and told her. I hope the fig bars helped. She didn't laugh. And as I left, I said the one thing I had rehearsed 1,000 different ways, but it came out soft and simple. There's not going to be a wedding. I didn't look back. But I swear I heard her say something under her breath. Whatever it wasn't sorry. And that was just the start of the unraveling. I didn't go home right away. I walked for over an hour, with no destination in mind. Just me in the rain, and the sound of my own heartbeat pounding like it was trying to remind me I was still alive. I ended up in front of the dry cleaners, staring at the window display like it held some kind of answer. I couldn't even remember how I got there. That's where I stood when I got the second text from her. Nolan, please, let's talk about this. I didn't reply. I didn't even open it fully. I read it from the preview on the lock screen. Then I locked my phone and slid it into my coat like I was afraid it would bite me. When I got back to our apartment, I didn't go inside. I stood in the hallway for a while. I could hear our neighbor's dog yapping behind the door across from ours and the clink of someone's keys down the hall. Normal life, happening all around me, like nothing had been shattered. I opened the door to our place and was hit by the smell of old lavender. Her candle, the one she lit when she wanted to reset the vibe. The irony almost made me laugh. I sat on the edge of our bed for 20 minutes before I did anything. Her half of the closet still looked untouched. I stared at her shoes lined up perfectly like soldiers. I thought about how she always tied her laces twice for symmetry and how I used to find it quirky. Now it felt cold, like she'd never been real. Then I did something I hadn't done in years. I called my dad. We hadn't talked much since he moved to Florida after the divorce. He's not a warm guy. He talks in facts and numbers, not feelings. But when I told him what happened, he was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "You did the right thing, Nolan. You don't marry someone who disappears. You marry someone who shows up." That stuck with me. For the next few days, I tried to exist in silence. I worked from home. I turned down Iris calls. I avoided group chats. I even muted the calendar reminders labeled cake tasting and ring fitting. It was like erasing a version of myself I'd been building for years. And yet, I still expected her to come knocking, to say something real, something human. Instead, what I got was an Instagram post. Yes, an Instagram post. 5 days after our meeting at Boothman's, she uploaded a carousel of photos. Her in the mountains. Her with a guitar. Her smiling next to a man I didn't recognize, who looked like he hadn't shaved in a year and wore bracelets made of twine. The caption read, "Sometimes you have to disappear to find your truth. Here's to rediscovering who you are, unapologetically." And the kicker? #no regrets. I stared at it for a full minute. Not because I was surprised, but because I was stunned by the ease of it all. As if I'd just been a subplot in the epic story of her self-discovery. A footnote with a ring. That night, Ira came over with 2 pizzas and no expectations. He didn't ask questions. Just sat on the floor with me and made dumb jokes about pineapple toppings. At one point, he looked at me and said, "You still love her, huh?" I didn't answer. I didn't have to. But I knew something had changed. Not in how I felt, but in how I saw her. You can love someone and still recognize the damage they've done. You can grieve someone while knowing they're the reason for the grief. It's a strange kind of mourning. Then the messages started. She began calling, leaving voicemails. Sometimes angry, sometimes tearful, sometimes eerily calm. One time, she just said, "Nolan, you don't get to walk away like that. After everything." But what everything? After the lies? After the van? After turning me into a background character in her digital scrapbook? Still, I broke down once. I answered one of her calls. My voice cracked when I said hello. Hers didn't. "Nolan," she said, "you're not even fighting for us. You're just giving up." I said, "You disappeared." And then, with zero hesitation, she said something I will never forget. "I disappeared because you never really saw me." That line. That line is what finally made me understand she was gone long before she left. And yet, the worst part? I still wasn't ready for what came next. Because when she realized I wasn't coming back, she decided to destroy everything on her way out. It started with the emails. At first, I didn't even realize what was happening. I just finished a Zoom call with a new client and was responding to some project tickets when I saw a strange email in my inbox titled, "Personal Conduct Concern, Please Respond." It was from HR. My stomach dropped. The email was brief but serious. Someone had filed a report stating that I had been emotionally unstable at work, made inappropriate comments about women, and potentially breached the company's code of ethics. There were no names attached, but they wanted to schedule a formal conversation to discuss recent concerns raised by multiple individuals. I felt like the room tilted. I hadn't said anything inappropriate. I hadn't even been in the office for weeks. I mostly communicated through Slack or email. But suddenly, it hit me, Callie. She used to joke that she could burn me to the ground and still walk out smiling. I never took her seriously. But now, I had to wonder, was she really trying to sabotage me? I texted Ira immediately. He told me to breathe, then asked if Callie still had access to any of my devices or accounts. She didn't. I'd changed all my passwords the week I canceled the wedding. But Callie was smart. She used to work in PR. She knew exactly how to spin things, how to weaponize perception. I began to wonder how far she'd go. 2 days later, I got a DM on LinkedIn from an old colleague, someone I hadn't spoken to in a year. "Hey man, I heard some stuff about you. Just checking in. Everything good?" I called him right away. He was hesitant, but eventually admitted he'd heard from a mutual friend that Callie was telling people I had a breakdown and went off the rails after she ended things. That I had been tracking her location and calling her obsessively. That I was the one who needed help. I wanted to scream. I hadn't even contacted her once since the last voicemail. I hadn't commented, messaged, or tried to find her. I was barely keeping my own life together, let alone plotting revenge. But I guess truth didn't matter when you knew how to craft a better story. The next blow came through a mutual friend's birthday party. I wasn't even planning on going, but Ira insisted. He said I needed a break, a few drinks, some normal human interaction. So I went. And of course, Callie was there. She walked in like she owned the room. Hair curled, makeup flawless, fake confidence wrapped around her like a shawl. The moment she saw me, her eyes narrowed like we were in some kind of courtroom drama. She didn't come over, but she made sure I saw her whispering to people. Saw them glancing at me. Saw the subtle nods and pitying looks. I'd been framed in advance. Whatever came next, she was already laying the groundwork. And then she made her move. She clinked her glass and said she wanted to say something personal. My entire body tensed. Everyone turned to look at her. She smiled wide and said, "Some of you might know that I recently got out of a very intense relationship. I won't name names, but I want to thank those of you who supported me when things got scary. Scary." She called me scary. I couldn't believe it. I wasn't loud. I wasn't controlling. I'd spent most of the relationship apologizing for things I didn't do. And now I was being painted like a villain in front of the very people who once congratulated us on our engagement. Ira stepped in. He interrupted the toast with a fake cough and quickly raised his beer to new beginnings and better friends. A few people clapped, awkwardly. Callie smirked, like she'd gotten what she wanted. I left early. That night, I sat on my balcony with a blanket and 2 glasses of whiskey, one untouched. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just stared at the skyline and tried to understand how love could turn into this. How someone who once memorized my coffee order could stand in a room full of people and call me dangerous. And that's when I realized something bigger was happening. This wasn't just heartbreak. This wasn't just cheating. It was something else. It was erasure. She wasn't trying to move on. She was trying to erase me. And she wasn't done yet. I wish I could tell you that I fought back. That I stormed into that party and called her out. That I proved to everyone what was really happening. But I didn't. Because I couldn't. Because deep down, I still wanted to believe that somewhere inside the woman spinning those lies, there was a flicker of the girl who once danced barefoot with me in a grocery store aisle because Sinatra came on and it felt right. But that flicker was gone. What remained now was a version of Callie I didn't recognize, strategic, vindictive, and terrifyingly good at making me look like a threat. And the part that kept me up every night was this. No matter how false it all was, it didn't matter. People believed the louder voice. And Callie had the volume turned all the way up. After the party, I disappeared. Not literally, but emotionally. I stopped checking my socials. I stopped responding to calls, even Iris. I worked in silence, ate in silence, and slept in clothes I didn't bother folding. I wasn't angry. I was hollow. My life had collapsed not with a bang, but with a press release. But even silence has its limits. And mine ended on a Wednesday afternoon when I opened the mailbox and saw an envelope with no return address. Inside was a letter, not handwritten, typed, for paragraphs. The first was a vague acknowledgement of our shared past. The second was an accusation that I had violated Callie's emotional safety, that I had demonstrated persistent instability. The third paragraph was the threat, legal action. She was considering a restraining order if I continued attempts to interfere with her personal healing journey. And the fourth paragraph? It was a request for the ring back. Not the wedding ring. The engagement ring. The one I spent 2 months saving for and a week nervously hiding in the glove compartment of my car before proposing with it at our favorite lake spot. The one she said made her feel like I actually saw her. That ring. She wanted it back, she said, because it was a symbol she no longer felt safe wearing. I read that letter 3 times. I read it so much I could quote it from memory. And every time I reread it, I felt something change in me. Not anger. Not sadness. Something colder. Something sharper. I walked over to the kitchen drawer and took out the small velvet box I hadn't touched in weeks. I held it for a long time, debating whether to mail it, burn it, or throw it into the river behind our building. But I didn't do any of those things. I drove 2 hours out of the city, past the edge of reception, to a tiny town we once stopped at on the way to her cousin's wedding. We had lunch at a roadside diner there. Callie had pancakes for lunch and told me that if she ever disappeared, She'd want to be somewhere no one could find her. That memory was burned into me like a brand. So I stopped at that diner again, ordered the same thing. Then I left the ring box on the table, tucked under the receipt, and walked out. That was the last I saw of it. Or her. Or so I thought. Because I made the mistake of thinking that her smear campaign was the final act. But Callie wasn't done. She was just regrouping. And a week later, she went after the one person I had left, my mother. It started with a message request on Facebook. Then a phone call she refused to tell me about. Then one night, my mom sat across from me in the living room, holding her phone like it had turned into a bomb. She looked heartbroken. I didn't know. Nolan, she whispered. I didn't know it had gotten this bad between you two. I blinked. What are you talking about? She turned her phone to show me a screenshot. A message from Callie. Your son scares me. I'm worried what he might do to himself. Or to others. Please, just talk to him before it's too late. That was the moment something inside me shattered for good. Because Callie wasn't just trying to ruin me in front of our friends. She wasn't just trying to rewrite the breakup. She was trying to paint me as a threat to myself. To make it look like she was the hero, the compassionate one, reaching out to save the damaged man she had abandoned. I looked my mom in the eyes and said, I've never raised my voice to her. Never. Not once. You know me. She nodded. She believed me. But the damage was already done. The seed of doubt had been planted. And Callie knew exactly what she was doing. I realized then that I had no more places left to hide. And that's when I made a decision. Not revenge. Not confrontation. I was going to vanish. Quietly, fully, and without warning. Just like she did. But the difference? I wouldn't come back. I didn't leave a note. I didn't pack a suitcase like they do in movies, with neat stacks of clothes and a leather duffel thrown over one shoulder as if it's a vacation. I didn't even say goodbye to my mom. She would have tried to stop me. Or worse, offered to come with me. What I did was far less cinematic. I shut down everything. I deactivated my social media. Deleted my contacts except for 3 people, my landlord, my boss, and Ira. I scheduled a meeting with HR to discuss my mental health and told them I was stepping back indefinitely. I didn't cry during the meeting, but I could see one of the managers shift uncomfortably when I mentioned Callie's name. The rumors had done their work. I rented a 1-bedroom cabin in Michigan. Off the grid. No Wi-Fi. No cell reception. Just trees, snow, and the sound of my own breath echoing off the window glass at night. The listing said, perfect for writers or grieving minds. I wasn't writing, but the second part? That fit. I didn't tell Ira where I was going. I just texted him. I'm okay. Don't come looking. I need space the way she once did. Just for real this time. He didn't reply, but I know he saw it. The 3 dots popped up, disappeared, came back, disappeared again. That was enough. The cabin was colder than I expected. I spent the first 2 nights just trying to keep the fire going and figuring out how the old stovetop worked. I burned my first 3 meals and drank instant coffee like it was medicine. And still, I slept better than I had in months. No nightmares. No echoes of her voice. Just silence. At first, I thought this might heal me. That maybe I just needed to disappear like she had, to feel control over my own vanishing. But the quiet, while peaceful, also became a mirror. And I started to see the truth about myself. I wasn't just a guy who got cheated on. I wasn't just a victim of someone's reinvention campaign. I had lost myself long before Callie ever stepped into that camper van with a guy who wore leather beads and talked about finding energy in movement. The truth was, I let her go emotionally months before she physically left. I ignored the signs, the long silences, the questions she never answered, the way she stopped holding my hand when we crossed streets or how she flinched when I said forever. I told myself she was tired, that she needed time. But deep down, I think I knew, and I didn't want to face it. Because if I faced it, I'd have to admit something even worse. That I was scared to be alone. It's embarrassing to say, but I was the guy who built my life around someone else's orbit. Callie had dreams. Callie had direction. I had calendars and to-do lists and backup chargers. I thought stability was enough. I thought loving someone well, quietly, and consistently was enough. Turns out, love needs to feel like freedom, not a schedule. The longer I stayed in that cabin, the more I realized how small I'd made myself to keep her. How I apologized for being too available. How I gave up my favorite band because she called them emotionally shallow. How I stopped bringing up my dad because she rolled her eyes every time I mentioned Florida. I did it all just to keep the peace. But peace built on silence is just pressure waiting to explode. One morning, I woke up before the sun. The sky was soft gray. I stood by the window wrapped in a blanket, staring out into the pines. I whispered aloud, I don't think I'll love her anymore. And that's when I heard the knock on the door. It was soft, hesitant. I froze. No one knew I was here. Not even Ira. I waited. Another knock. This one louder. I opened it slowly, heart pounding. And there she was. Callie. Standing on the steps of the cabin, hair windswept, coat too thin for the cold, eyes wide like she'd seen a ghost. I didn't speak. I couldn't. She just looked at me and said, I couldn't let you go without telling you what really happened. And before I could react, before I could close the door or invite her in or scream or collapse, she stepped inside. The air between us was sharp, almost frozen. I didn't even move out of the doorway at first, just stood there like a broken coat rack, watching her brush snow off her sleeves like she belonged here, like she had a right to this space I had built out of the ruins she left behind. Callie didn't say anything for a while. She looked around the cabin like she was inspecting the life I had scraped together without her. A chipped mug sat on the windowsill. My flannel shirt draped over the arm of the one chair that didn't creak. The fire had gone out 2 hours ago, but the smell of burnt logs still lingered. Finally, I found my voice. It sounded unfamiliar. How did you find me? She didn't answer, just slipped off her gloves and stuffed them into her pocket. I stepped aside reluctantly. She walked in like it was just another evening back home, like we hadn't collapsed into two separate realities. You didn't have to come, I said quietly, watching her move toward the chair like it still remembered her. I know, she replied, but I couldn't leave it the way it ended. I didn't know if I was angry or just numb. My jaw clenched, but I didn't raise my voice. You mean the part where you lied? Or the part where you made me out to be some unhinged lunatic in front of everyone I know? She flinched, slightly. Good. I didn't lie, she said. I just didn't tell the whole truth. I laughed. It came out broken, hollow. That's rich. She looked up at me then, and I swear for the first time in months, her eyes looked like the girl I once proposed to. Not cold. Not calculated. Just tired. You were right to walk away, she said. I deserve that. But I need you to understand something before I go, and I swear, I won't bother you again after this. I didn't nod. I didn't agree. I just waited. She took that as permission. I never went to Oregon for some spiritual escape, she said. That part was true. But it wasn't about self-discovery. It was about escape. From everything. From you. From me. Her voice cracked slightly. There was no musician. No van. That story I told you at the cafe? I made it up. Because I thought if I painted myself as a woman on a journey, you'd hate me less than if I told you the truth. I stared at her, not sure I could handle whatever was coming next. I was having a breakdown, Nolan. A real one. I didn't want to marry you, not because I didn't love you, but because I didn't know who I was anymore. And instead of admitting that, I ran. Then when I came back, I saw how easy it was to become the victim in other people's eyes. It was addicting. People offered sympathy. They gave me validation. So I kept going. I felt my chest tighten, like someone had tied fishing wire around my ribs. You destroyed me, Callie, I whispered. I know, she said, barely audible. And I think I wanted to. She blinked quickly, trying not to cry. She didn't deserve to cry. I thought you'd never leave me, that I could do anything and you'd still be there. And that terrified me more than anything, because I didn't feel worthy of it. I swallowed hard. So instead, you made me into the villain so you could walk away guilt-free. She looked down. Yes. There was silence again. Heavy. Cold. I walked to the fireplace, pretending I needed to stoke it, but really just needing to put my back to her. I couldn't look at her while my hands were shaking. You sent messages to my mom, I said. You told people I was unstable. Do you have any idea what that did to me? She stood up. I was cruel. And I didn't stop myself. I convinced myself that you were part of the problem just to feel better about the chaos in my own head. But you weren't the problem, Nolan. You were never the problem. I turned slowly. Then why come here? She stepped toward the door, slowly, as if knowing her time was running out. Because I heard you were gone, she said. Not just physically. People said you dropped off the map. And for the first time, I felt what it was like to be truly erased. To wonder if someone out there hates you so much they won't even speak your name. She opened the door, snow blowing in around her. I just wanted to say I'm sorry. And I mean it. I stood there frozen, not because I forgave her, but because I didn't know what to feel anymore. She walked out without waiting for a response. And for the second time in my life, I watched Callie disappear. But this time, she didn't take anything with her. And for the first time, I didn't chase her. When the door closed behind her, it felt like the cabin exhaled. Like the walls themselves had been holding their breath while she was inside. I stood in the center of the room, numb, listening to the wind push against the windows. There was no drama, no shouting, just absence. And yet, I felt heavier than I had when I arrived. Her apology had been real. I could feel that. But it didn't fix anything. It didn't change the way she dismantled me from the inside out and left me to rot in my own skin. I went outside for air. The snow was falling gently, layering everything in softness, hiding the rough edges of the world. I walked toward the edge of the tree line with no coat, no gloves, just my breath steaming and my thoughts unraveling like thread from a torn sweater. That night, I didn't sleep. I made a fire, sat on the floor, and replayed her words over and over. I thought you'd never leave me. That was supposed to be a comfort once, wasn't it? I thought unconditional love was the goal. I thought being the one who stayed made me strong. Turns out, it just made me invisible. In the morning, I wrote something. Not a novel, not a diary entry, just a note to myself on the back of an old grocery list I found in my jacket pocket. It said, "You stayed too long at a place you were never seen." I pinned it above the fireplace. Over the next few days, I started to do things again. Small things. I cooked meals that didn't involve boiling water. I shaved. I swept the floor even though no one would see it. I took walks each morning and nodded at trees like they were neighbors. And slowly, I started to hear a voice I hadn't heard in years, my own. It wasn't loud. It wasn't particularly brave. But it was mine. And it didn't sound like Callie. By the end of the week, I called Ira. He didn't say, "I told you so." He didn't ask why I vanished. He just asked, "Are you ready to come back?" And for the first time since the breakup, I actually considered the question. I wasn't sure what back meant. Back to what? My apartment was still in my name, but it felt like a haunted house filled with old echoes and shadows shaped like someone else's decisions. My job was waiting, but I didn't want to sit behind a screen for 10 hours a day pretending to care about client requests while I wondered what my ex was posting online. And my friends, God, what would I say to them? That everything they heard was a lie? That I let someone narrate my downfall while I curled up in silence? But maybe coming back didn't have to mean going back to what was. Maybe it meant something new. Ira picked me up a few days later. He showed up with a giant thermos of coffee and a playlist called Operation Unmess Nolan. I nearly cried before we even hit the highway. Back in the city, things weren't the same. And thank God for that. I didn't want the same. I didn't want to rebuild the life I had with Callie. I wanted to build something better, smaller, quieter, mine. I cleared out our old apartment. I didn't save much, just some books, a couple of mugs, and a blanket I always liked more than she did. I moved into a tiny studio a few blocks from a park where nobody knew me. I started therapy. The real kind. Not the, "I'm fine, I just need to vent" kind. I talked about how small I felt. How afraid I was of being boring. How much I hated the version of myself that needed her approval like oxygen. And I wrote. Not to her. Not about her. I wrote about me. About the boy who used to draw comics in science class. About the guy who once dreamed of teaching instead of designing software. About the man who now knew that loyalty without boundaries wasn't love, it was self-erasure. I'd like to tell you there was a happy ending just around the corner. That I met someone new. That the right person walked into my life as soon as I figured things out. But that's not how this works. What I found instead was peace. Quiet, boring, beautiful peace. And then, just when I thought she was done for good, Callie resurfaced. Not in person. Not even through a friend. But with a video. A video that would change everything. The video was posted late at night. I wouldn't have seen it if Ira hadn't sent me the link with just 3 words. "You need this." I hesitated. My stomach twisted like it used to every time her name appeared on my screen. But I clicked. There she was. Callie. Sitting cross-legged in front of a bookshelf in a bare apartment. No filters. No makeup. Just her, staring into the camera. I debated even recording this, she began. But I owe it to the person I hurt most. Her voice shook, not for effect, just honestly. She talked for 11 minutes. No edits. No dramatic music. Just a raw stream of what I never thought I'd hear. Accountability. She admitted to manipulating the narrative. To painting me as the bad guy when she was the one unraveling. She acknowledged the harm she caused emotionally, socially, professionally. She even apologized to my mother by name. And then came the part that knocked the air from my lungs. "I wasn't just afraid of marrying Nolan," she said. her eyes glassy. I was afraid he'd love me even after I didn't deserve it. And that made me destroy everything. She ended with this. If you're watching, Nolan, I don't expect forgiveness, but I needed you to hear the truth. Not from someone else, from me. Then the screen faded to black. I didn't cry. I didn't cheer. But I felt something I hadn't in a long time. Release. Not the fantasy kind where pain vanishes overnight, but the honest kind, where the weight lifts just enough for you to breathe again. Ira and I didn't even talk about the video when we met for lunch the next day. We just ate burgers and argued about baseball and made fun of how badly I still parallel park. And somewhere in the middle of all that, I realized I was okay. Not fixed. Not perfect. But okay. I kept writing. Not about Callie, but about starting over. About resilience. About rediscovering identity after it's been hijacked. I submitted one of my essays to a small online magazine, not expecting anything. They published it. Emails trickled in. People said the story helped them, that they'd been through something similar, that they felt seen. And then about 2 months later, I met someone. Her name was Gwen. We bumped into each other, literally, in the frozen food aisle at a local grocery store. I was reaching for a carton of mint chocolate chip. So was she. Our hands touched. We both apologized too much. We laughed. It wasn't electric. It wasn't cinematic. It was real, slow, steady, safe. She never asked about Callie. She just got to know me. The me who likes jazz when it rains, who alphabetizes his bookshelf, who still wears mismatched socks on purpose. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I had to shrink to fit next to someone else's flame. Months passed. Seasons changed. One evening, I sat on the balcony of my new apartment, coffee in hand, Gwen reading beside me, and I realized something. Callie didn't break me. She stripped away who I wasn't supposed to be. And what's left now is just me, fully mine. Finally enough.